folks, welcome to another episode of Not Another Whiskey Podcast. I am your host, Nicholas Polacki, joined as always by my partner in crime, Mitch Bouchard. Today we have an amazing episode where we're joined by somebody that I'm going to refer to as the ninja of the spirits world. Somebody you maybe you've never heard this name before, but you should know it moving forward. This is Neil Macloud Mathieson, whiskey maker of Mossburn Distillers, where they have got some exciting news of just building the second distillery on the Isle of Skye, Torabhaig, as well as owning Reaver's grain whiskey distiller on the borders down by River Tweed. Neil, thank you so much for joining us on Not Another Whiskey Podcast.
Not a problem at all.
And Mitch, as always, thanks for being my co-host. You are
great to be here.
You're not in your usual dwellings.
No, I'm not, mate. I'm just a little pit stop in Fife until I go back up the road to Speyside. So in Edinburgh last night. So this is my mum's bedroom. It's the only place in my mum's house that's actually quiet to do this because everything is chaos everywhere else. But Neil, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us today. It's great to have you here.
Good. I'm looking forward to telling you whatever you want to know because I don't think that at Mossburn we have many secrets.
Well, that's good to hear. We like that.
We do like that, which means we're nosy bastards. So we're going to privy into every single part of your private life and find out what's going on. Currently, you're calling in from Italy, so even then, there's so many stories. You might be the whiskey equivalent of the most interesting man in the world. You have travelled the world, looking at everything from eau de vie, cognac, craft spirits, Scotch whiskey, blended whiskies, blending houses. Tell us a little bit about your journey. Like how did you get into the spirits industry and what year did that begin for you?
It happened at university because when you're studying things like law and accountancy or management, which is what I was covering, it wasn't that interesting. It was a lot less interesting than going down to the college bar or to the local pub. So we I suppose looked at our future and said to myself that there had to be more in it. Now, in the old days, you used to get out your fountain pen and write a letter to people. So that's what I did, and I ended up being invited to various companies in France, some champagne houses, some brandy houses, on the back of simply writing to them. And it was there that I learnt my first little gems and little bits of knowledge that perhaps you only pick up in situ about distilling and blending. So
basically studying drove you to drink?
It did indeed. And there had to be something better than warm beer or lager.
Fair play. So did you go and spend time in France then to work with these companies? Is that the journey?
Indeed, yes. In reality, I suppose the breaker that you get when you go to a different country and invest yourself in reality what they're doing and how they do it, there's a sort of interest level that took me to a different level. And that was when we were in Armagnac looking at distilling on a very micro way, because in reality, it's a very small industry. And that against the cognac world and against the champagne world of blending, the three of them gave me a very good grounding.
Fantastic. So what took you then, obviously going from kind of cognac and kind of French spirits, what then brought you back to like the homeland where you started to then look at Scotch whiskies and blending and obviously being a whiskey maker?
Well, the first ideas we had were to come back and try to enact what we had learned, but in those days, this is 40 years ago, it was very difficult to be a micro distiller in Britain. So in the end, we ended up opening an import house with all of the people that we'd met in France to start with. And then when that wasn't enough for us, we added Scotch whiskies, we added American whiskies, we added rums, we added all sorts of things from all over the world. And then when that wasn't enough, we got back into the micro distillation business, because at that point, the American craft distilling scene had, I suppose, just awoken. And I went out and visited perhaps 10 out of the first 15 of these distillers to see what they were making, how they were making it, and how they got around the rules in America. which we were finding quite difficult to envisage in the UK.
And what time point was this, Neil? What year are we talking about here?
Oh, this is in the 90s.
Okay.
25 years ago.
Wow.
And the trouble with that, of course, is that you become a fanatic for it in reality, because you meet so many interesting people, you meet so many interesting products, and then you also get to see where, in your view, people are making mistakes or they're making great products.
Yeah, I think that's a really, especially looking at the American craft world, we're now seeing, I guess, they're reaping the reward of some of that hard work now, where the best craft distillers have survived. And I always say, there's a fine line between craft and crap. Sometimes, these people come out and I want to be a distiller, and you're like, okay, well, there's a lot more to it than just the want and need and trying to have a cool background and some good marketing. You actually need to know how to make a product that people want to drink. And now we're starting to see that kind of lift in the United States with an amazing flurry of not just American style whiskies, but even the American single malt category is starting to expand out here. And that's great to see as well. And the quality level is high.
I think also that in a more commercial world, which America seems to have, there was also the need to get there quicker.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that people broke any rules, but they had in their minds an element of speed that allowed them to experiment, I suppose, with a lot more of the tools that aren't traditional for Scotch whisky making. And this is one of the things that a lot of them did. I'm not so sure that the background that a lot of them had allowed them to explore this properly, but obviously for some of them, they did very well.
Yeah. And even in the maturation side of things, I saw a lot of kind of the need to accelerate that process specifically with, adding wood chips and different cask ends and trying to do things, putting staves into the barrels as well as the externals of the barrel.
I think we've seen just about everything that can happen out there, right down to shake and age, because it looks like some of the barrels are only the size of a cocktail shaker.
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen that in some distilleries ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about Mossburn. The journey then into kind of, I guess, being an independent bottler, as well as being able to blend and create your own blends through that, and then some of the other distilleries then that have come out of that. What was the starting point? What was the impetus behind creating Mossburn?
Well, when you are in the distributive world, there's always a hankering to take the best of what you see, or to actually produce something of that ilk yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you can't distill, then obviously blending and owning stock is one of the ways to look at it. And we never had a problem making that decision. It was simply once you started to buy bulk stock at a young age and age it, the question was, how were you going to market it? And in I suppose the type of spirit that we wanted to work with was good spirit as opposed to Scotch whisky per se. So what we did was we ended up stockholding small amounts of brandies, cognacs, armagnacs, rums, and whiskies. And I think that the world in those days existed more for the independent Scotch bottlers than it did for the independent rum bottlers or the independent brandy bottlers. So I think that we ended the journey heading towards Scotland rather than anywhere else. It was closer. We had friends in Scotland. The family background that I have included family members who worked in Diageo and other companies. So it was something that was much closer to home. I suppose easier to envisage us working in the whiskey world than in the other worlds.
Yep.
And then, Neil, take us back to like those early days of Mossburn, when you guys first started putting your blends together. How did that all look? It must have been quite an exciting time, quite a nerve-wracking time as well, I suppose.
Well, it is, because you have to rely as an independent. You have to rely on your friends in the industry who make product. And so the first thing that we found was that we had to understand the marketplace better on both sides, the supply side and the selling side. And the supply side, as we all know, is dominated by some large companies. We had to become friends with some of these people. And if you need to become friends with the top 10 producers of whiskey in Scotland, you have to behave in the right way in order to remain friends with them. And the development from there into buying new make and controlling all the aging was something that had to come later, because we needed, like every small company, we needed to turn some of this whiskey that was coming in into cash that would support further purchases.
Yep. So on that, what would you describe as being the signature move? Because I was doing some reading, and then somebody once described it as Frankenstein casks. Like this ability to take casks and make weird and wonderful things with unique casks. Is that something, and I'm sure those weren't your words, but what would you say has become the signature on how Mossburn looks at blending and working with maturation?
I'm not sure that the hybridizing of wood styles is something that's unique to us. But what we found was, obviously, with small stocks, but the wish to blend, and the wish to blend different oak-aged or oak-matured spirits together, we found was very difficult for us with the amount of stock that we had. If you consider the easiest way to make a nice blended malt, or a nice single malt, is to take a multiplicity of ages, a multiplicity of styles of aging, examine them all at your leisure, and then put together an amazing blend which you can introduce to your peer group, who then agree that it's all very good. That's not what happens when you're a small indie. And when you're a small indie, you go out and look at your barrel stock, and it's not so big. You look at your age stock, and it's not so deep. You look at the different types of barrel you have, and it's not so wide.
So instead of doing like multicast maturation and moving the liquid around, this was more about taking the barrels themselves and having them operate, doing that without it being changed. So, for example, for the listener out there, taking a bourbon barrel and putting a sherry hogshead head on either end of it, or something like that, or interchanging staves.
Exactly that. You can add seasoned wood to them, or you can add more fresh wood to them. And then it just became not a game, but it became a way to envisage how a larger stock might work if one had that larger stock.
That's interesting.
And then the trouble with making up some blends is that once you've made a blend and you like it, you wish to continue it. So therefore, if you grow a little bit in terms of volume, and we might have grown to bottling 40 barrels, 60 barrels at a time in terms of single batches. But what we do is we've continued using these methods as we've grown slightly, in order that we don't lose the reality of the initial flavors from the first 3, 4, 5 years of production. And I think that as we've grown and got a greater depth into our sourcing of wood, we've also learned a lot about the types of wood that we feel give us the flavor profiles that we want to incorporate into our final blends.
That's amazing.
Wood is it's an enormous topic for anybody who's looking at lengthy aging, and there are aspects of it which can color up the spirit quite quickly. And all of these things, you get to play with them. It's your artist palette.
Yeah.
So, Neil, let's move on to present day. Was looking back on when you started Mossburn, was the idea always to create a distillery and start a distillery, or was that something that sort of came around accidentally?
No, we imported a lot of spirits, but they all seem to have a similar style. They all seem to have a subtlety and a complexity that suited our palates. For us in the whiskey world, obviously, we wanted to look at a distillery that might do the same and might produce liquid that we could produce the same aged stocks from. And I think that when we said to ourselves, is there any way that we can do this on our own? The answer was very simply no.
So, Neil, moving into kind of 2017, you guys started to, I guess, create Torabhaig Distillery, which is only the second distillery on the Isle of Skye. So
that's right. But the dream starts a lot earlier, because it's very difficult to understand just how long it takes to build a distillery in a historic building on an island off Scotland's mainland. I think
What,
that,
you mean the permits didn't come through just like that? Scottish Government weren't just welcoming you in with open arms?
The Scottish Government were fantastic. The fact is that on an island such as Skye, God is not so kind to you. So we have no complaints about the guys who came to talk to us about how we were playing with this listed building or anything like that, because the rules were set before we started. So we knew this was going to be difficult. But how many distilleries build a roof that you can take off with a crane so that you can get your stills out? In order to replace our stills in the future, we had to look at that at the beginning. So you walk into our still area, and it sits within its own box, and that box has a lift-off roof, complete with Ballachulish slate. So we'll have to maybe take a couple of slates off to be able to lift the weight.
That's wild.
You have to then look at the physics and then the chemistry and then the still building in order to imagine that it's going to come out with what you want. So you go and talk with the still makers. We went to Forsyths because it was a good choice for us in order to have something hand-built to fit into our building. Mm-hmm. And then we discussed with a group of industry experts how to envisage the stills producing a flavor profile that I could only describe in words, as opposed to illustrating it with lots of different bottles, saying this is how close we want to get to this, this is how close we want to get to this. What we did was we simply described it in words and then imagined that the still would produce this. So this all takes place 2 to 3 years before you actually start distilling.
That's funny because whenever people ask Mitch to describe a whiskey, he does it in interpretive dance. So that's something he's really mastered over the years.
I mean, I can do that right now if you want, Neil. If you want to.
So Neil, if you ever need a video made of Torabhaig's spirit and interpretive dance, Mitch Twinkle Toes Bouchard is more than happy to take on that project for you.
And I think that it's the same with music. Music, in some instances, describes the whiskey to you, or in other instances, it makes it incredibly difficult to pick from your back shelf which whiskey you want to drink with that type of music.
So what music do you choose then? If someone was to say, describe Torabhaig as an album, who would the artist be and what is the album?
It's very difficult, isn't it? There's a little bit of Stan Getz to some of it, but at the same time, there's some great female vocalists that I believe that our Alt Glen was in tune with. I'm not sure as we get more rowdy and a little bit more raucous with the Virgin Oaks that are going to come through over the next couple of years. We might not head off into the Green Day era of things, but it's whatever takes you when you're blending.
Neil, I want to ask you about the location. For you chose Skye. When you do a distillery on an island, it's always going to have tricky aspects of it that you've mentioned already. Skye is one of the more accessible islands, right? Because you have that bridge. There's a lot of footfall with regards to tourists coming over. Was that some of the main reasons, or were there other reasons involved in that particular location?
No, not really. I mean, the bridge wasn't there when I was young, and I completely missed the bit where you had to pay to get across it. But no, it was simply Macloud territory, and having family from Skye and Lewis. And being, let's put it, dragged up there endlessly. Obviously, you started to get to like it, and it started to become, your preferred highland or island home away from home. Not that I would move there to be sure. Let's be honest about this, because the weather can be atrocious.
And the midges.
Well, we're not so worried about the midges. You get used to them. Just don't eat too many of them. But the endless rain can be a little bit disheartening. It's certainly not an island I would go to if I suffered from needing heat and dry conditions. But it was in my mind, perfect for whiskey. There's lots of water almost all year. And there isn't the incessant heat that might make distillation difficult for more than a month in the summer. We decided in reality that Skye was a great place to be, because it was an island, because the islands are linked to the style of whiskey we wanted to make, which was a smoky whiskey, and because it was a second home in my thinking.
So take us back to that day in 2017 when the first bit of New Make Spirit ran through the stills. How did that make you feel? Was it quite a joyous day? Did you get on it afterwards?
The funny thing about the first 6 months, let's put it, is that you can't be there every day. In fact, I would say that I was absolutely not even there every week. But the spirit to come through in the way that we wanted it to come through happened very quickly. Everybody starts by boiling water so that you know that the system is going to work. After that, the spirit comes through. Whether the spirit is right in your mind with no back history at all and no idea of how it's going to age was something that we had to work in. So the team up there were incredibly important, reporting to me about whether they thought that the whiskey, the spirit was coming right. And remember, one of the different things we did at Torabhaig was we looked to employ a whole team who hadn't been part of the whiskey industry in their lives. It was very important for us to try to go to the locale and say, would you come and work with us and learn a new industry, a new game, a new skill set in order to produce with me the type of spirit that I would like us to produce. So we had all of these people working there who were encouraged to say exactly what they thought about the level of peating, about the cut on the spirit, about the smells coming from the ferment. And I think in reality, we were not satisfied until probably about the April of the next year.
With the distillate that came off prior to that, is that just stuff that you'll hold back for weird and wonderful releases,
No.
or?
Absolutely not. We're using it at the moment. The good thing about our stills and our methodology is that we're producing lovely spirit all the time. We were just looking for different highlights from some of it to match perhaps something that may not have existed, but something we hoped would come round during the aging process.
And is Torabhaig like, a lot of, when you look at a lot of the new distilleries right now in Scotland, they're experimenting with different yeast strains, different cut points. Is that something that you guys are doing, or is it strictly, we want this heavily peated spirit and that's all we're going to do?
No, well, we did a lot of our experimentation to start with on the basis that if we are to standardize production, we needed to get that part out of the way. So we used multiple yeasts, several maltsters, several peat levels of peat intake on our barley in order to get to where we wanted to be. And then it was up to us to play with the length of fermentation and then the cuts. And yes, nowadays we work to a standard for a great proportion of the year, but we continue our experiment through what we call the journeyman month. So almost all distilleries will work for 11 months of the year. We're no different. Unfortunately, people need to take holidays. And quite often the distillery, it's easier to close than to run on reduced staffing levels. So what we do is we've kept a month back for our team to make whiskey. And what they do is that they have the complete range of everything that is legal to use in making whiskey. And I encourage them to think as weird or as wacky as they want, as long as it fits the SWA laws, the regulations. And this means that we can use any yeasts, any adjuncts. We can go down the brewing line and we can add multiple adjuncts or multiple yeasts, and we can ferment for longer. So we get our experimentation packed into this month.
That's amazing.
And we've used full peat barley up to 145. We've used roasted barleys, we've used chocolates, we've used all sorts of yeast variations and yeast combinations. And it's produced an amazing number of different spirits, but we don't really talk about them. You know, anybody who comes to the distillery will hear about it. Anybody who asks us questions will hear about it, but we're not marketing them yet. So I suppose there's a difference between somebody who has to make a lot of noise in order to sell something, and somebody who's rather less sure of themselves. And I think that we're a little bit less sure of ourselves, slightly, I wouldn't say humble, but slightly less sure that every experiment we do at Torabhaig is the right way to go.
So fast forward then, what do you see in the crystal ball, Neil? What's the future of Torabhaig and the distillery?
Well, we love the clean profile of Torabhaig. It's something that the whole team has got used to over the last 7-8 years. The main spine of Torabhaig is bourbon casking. So what we're doing is we're adding in stages different emphasis of flavour by using different cask sets, and we have now more than 20,000 barrels of Torabhaig. And they're spread across a huge array of different styles. But what we're doing is we're adding these back in on top of the bourbon just to see where it takes us. And hopefully, because what we want is people to talk back to us. We want people to say, we like the influence that on your gentle peat. We like the influence that it's adding in terms of complexity. And that will give us, I suppose, more to take forward. They're all a surprise to us, Nicholas. They're all a surprise to us.
Well, it's like Christmas morning. You can't wait to go in and shake the presents.
we absolutely cannot guess what the blend for our 10 and 12-year-olds will be yet. We cannot guess at all. We're loving some of the liquid, but when we blend it together, we might not like it quite as much as we thought we did.
Yep.
And I think that this is something that every young whiskey distillery goes through, because if you know the sort of simplicity of a single malt distillery, it's there itself. It is what it is. You can only change it post the spirit coming out, after you've sorted out your yeasts and your ferments and everything else like that. So, we had a very good idea what we wanted. We have a very good idea what we want at 10 or 12, but we don't know exactly how we're going to achieve that yet.
Here's my question. Does the still that you described in words, did they get it right? You're like, they've nailed what we were looking for, just based on, an idea that's in your head and then having to articulate that?
I think that if you're used to drinking new make and tasting straight out the still, you can tell yourself when you see a beautiful, sweet, aromatic product. We see this a lot in our Reivers distillery. My colleague Alan Philp is the master distiller there, and he's very into the detail of every step, to the extent that we're fronting his PhD simply on how this is all working within the still, because we have a unique grain distillery. So I think that everybody who is at the spirit end of the whiskey world understands how important it is for the freshness and the vivacity of your new make to come through. It's getting them involved in what we would call the whiskey making process that may not be equally seen throughout the industry. Very difficult for the bigger companies to involve all of their distillers in the final whiskies that they produce.
So Neil, let's move away from the production side of things. Let's talk about the visitor centre experience. I think with Torabhaig, you've got a nice little triangle almost of experiences. You've got Rassay kind of just across the water from you guys. You obviously got Talisker down the road, and then you have you guys, which you have a visitor centre experience. I'm assuming this was always something that was created, when you looked at the plans for the distillery, it was always there. Talk to everyone about what they can experience when they come to Torabhaig with regards to the tours and what you guys offer.
Well, we have, as you said, we had a view when we opened the distillery that it would be great to have people coming to us, great to have people walking around. And one of the things we wanted them to see is the fact that they could be relatively close to us. The basic tour takes you through our distillery at the same level that everybody is working on. So, you can stop and talk to people, as long as you don't do it for too long and get in the way. but what we want everybody to see, but possibly not touch, is the fact that everything is done, in a rather manual way by a team who are able to answer any question that you want, as well as a bunch of guides who are great and enthusiastic and passionate about our spirit and very knowledgeable. So as I said at the beginning, we have very few secrets at Torabhaig because if somebody stops at a certain point and asks, we will answer the questions. One can do a tour of the distillery. One can also go down to the aging cellar and taste down in the aging cellar. So I think that the important thing to us was to use it as a tool to further our relationship with our customer base. You're right when you were saying that it's a nice little triangle, and congratulations to Tasker. They've managed to reopen successfully, and they've had a staggering year last year. I believe they've doubled the number of people who can visit Tasker, which is great for the island of Skye, and hopefully great for us.
I'm sure. That's the best thing about the Scotch whisky industry. All ships rise in the high tide. And you're definitely in the place for a high tide.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just reading an article the other day that Skye is now the second most popular place in Scotland next to Edinburgh to visit for tourism, which is insane. That blew my mind.
I'm not surprising. I mean, if you look at the history of the Macloud and MacDonald families, why would one not go up there to go around the castles and drink whiskey while you're doing it? And the food scene is amazing. The music scene is amazing.
Yep.
The geography is amazing. Do you remember to book your hotels though if you're coming in the summer?
Yes, oh yeah, correct.
Can be very disappointing waiting for the ferry if you're taking the ferry and then arriving to find nowhere to stay.
Correct, indeed. Well, Neil, thank you so much for coming on to Not Another Whiskey Podcast. I think this has been really enlightening for both Mitch and myself, as well as all of our listeners out there. And, we'll put the taglines of where people can come in and see the brand and visit. But for those of you that are making the journey over to Scotland this summer or beyond, please be sure to check out Torabhaig, get to Isle of Skye, go and see this amazing historic building. And for those of you that are going further down south of Edinburgh, go and see if you can check out Reivers distillery on the borders, right in the River Tweed. I think that's a look. I mean, it's a beautiful looking still house down there.
Well, we've got plans for the new build. We break ground on more of the buildings next month. And I think you'll probably find that we'll be digging things up and putting new buildings up for the next 10 to 12 years.
Wow.
It's one of these things. We've been able to put together a little parcel of land that we hope should have warehousing, distillation and bottling so that we're in control of our own destiny.
Yeah, I think this is fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Really exciting to see the vision that you've got for this team and just bringing this next new generation of people into the whiskey world in Scotland. I think is really exciting as well.
And I think what should be really relevant for us is when we see our journeymen convert themselves into master distillers and then release their whiskies on the public. And it would be great to see the reactions when we do this, because they are completely different from our core Torabhaig flavour profile. And I think it should be fascinating, not just for the geeks, but for everybody else to see how different a spirit can be if you play around in a distillery.
All right, Neil. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate your time and look forward to checking out your distillery next time I'm on Skye, one of the few new ones that I haven't been to yet. So,
thank you. Goodbye.